So, Debo Samuel, glorified running back, Brandon Aiyuk, wide receiver one. This seems to be why a lot of Niner fans think Brandon Aiyuk should not return punts, that he's way too important to the offense. He's the only real wide receiver on the team, and that they just can't afford to give him 2 punt returns a game. Do you agree with that? Or should he return punts?
I think he should return punts. I think it's not a sense of like the injury things. I just think it gives one of your best football players, right? I still think Brandon Aiyuk is one of their best players on the team. I still think he's a hell of a football player, even though maybe I don't think he's Julio, But I think it gives one of your best players on your team one more opportunity to make a play on the field. That's all it is. That's all it really is. And yeah. I think one of the biggest things with the Niners is that their special teams is very conservative. It's a not to lose special teams rather than a special teams that wins them games, which is a little bit of a problem because the teams in their division do have special teams that win them games, right? Like you go back to week 1 against Arizona, the difference really in that football game besides Kyler Murray and DeAndre Hopkins was that Arizona's special teams made a play, the Niners special teams didn't. The only special teams plays I can remember in the Niners era is Markin Zachua blocking a punt or 3. I can remember 3. Marcel Harris forcing the fumble on Odell Beckham, which was kind of more of a product of Odell gripping the ball Michael Vick style than it was really Harris going after the football. Though to Harris's credit, it was a great play. Then Zachua blocked punt week 1 of 2019. And then the Richie James, I think he returned one for a touchdown. The Seattle game they won in 2018, he returned a kickoff for a touchdown, I want to say.
Yeah.
Those are the only ones I can remember off the top of my head. They're special teams. I mean, you go down the list. They have a kicker who's horrible at this point in his career from 50 yards plus. He's a really, really consistently good kicker from 45 yards and under.
True.
To me, that's conservative because you also pay him a lot of money for a kicker.
Yep.
You have a punter who's very, very good at punting from the 40 and landing the ball at the 15. He's very consistent at doing it. If you look at his deeper level stats, like punts inside the 20 net yard, all this, fair catches created, all of that stuff, I'm sure Mitch Wishnowsky, the analytics look good. But the thing is, Mitch Wishnowsky has never changed field position where you're punting from the 20 and he goes and downs the punt at the 9 or an 8. He doesn't change momentum of a football game, not to mention he's a bad kickoff specialist. Then you go down the return game. I mean, their punt returners and kickoff returners are known for 2 things. They're known for fair catches, and then they're known for doing the both arms go this way, this thing, to signal that the ball went over their head for a touchback. That's what they do. They have no explosive plays from their return game whatsoever. I mean, Trent Taylor returned punts for a good portion of last year, for God's sake, and the best thing he could do was catch the punt cleanly. River Craycraft had one punt return, where there was like 10 yards, 50 yards of space ahead of him, and he had a fair catch. Where this becomes a problem is you look at the Rams, especially the Rams under McVay when Jim Fossil was there, and even last year, they have a special teams that's won them games, right? Johnny Hecker is an absolute weapon as a punter. Then you look in Seattle, Michael Dickinson is an absolute weapon as a punter. And then you look at Arizona, Andy Lee is still booming them, man.
Yes, he is.
Andy Lee is still kicking right through the ball. So, like, when you look at it like that, like, you got to find yourself a way to get any advantage in a football game. And that's where Brandon Aiyuk returning punts gets you that advantage. And I buy the injury argument to an extent, but then you look at people like Antonio Brown returned punts for years upon years. Patrick Peterson returned punts for years. Julian Edelman returned punts for years.
Wes Welker.
Deion Sanders, Wes Welker. You can go down the list. So many
John Taylor.
Even Odell Beckham. Whenever there was an important punt return, the Giants would just stick him back there and have
Deshaun Jackson.
Stephon Diggs, I think his last year in Minnesota was the punt returner for the Minnesota Vikings. Deshaun Jackson returned them for years. Tyreek Hill, to me, tomorrow, if McCole Hardman gets hurt, Tyreek Hill is returning punts for them, just given Dave Tobin, Andy Reid's history. So
thank you. It's because they're like, oh, well, Tyreek Hill doesn't do it anymore. He used to, and they replaced him with someone who is also excellent. They're not just conceding that part of the game. They want to have a playmaker there. And it's like, well, the Niners average they have guys who aren't fast returning punts. You should have guys who are a threat to take it the distance.
Right.
Like if you give Brandon Aiyuk 30 chances at it, he might be able to crack 2 in a season.
And if you don't want Aiyuk to return the punts, then there are punt return specialists in the NFL that you could pay a decent sum of money and have him be back there for kickoffs and punts. But the Niners don't do that, right? Like Jet McKinnon was their kick returner for a minute last year. And what explosion did Jet McKinnon have at that point last year? So when you look at it like that, I just don't see an argument where you make Debo, not Debo, Aiyuk, not return punts.
Here's one. James Foster says Aiyuk is Isaac Bruce, and Bruce never returned punts. Who is returning punts? Craycraft, Sherfield, James, or Simba? Well, right now it's going to be Simba Webster, but let's stick with Aiyuk is Isaac Bruce.
But Aiyuk returned punts in college.
He did.
Isaac Bruce returned punts in college.
I don't know.
Just because Isaac Bruce didn't return college, oh God, Aiyuk shouldn't. Just because Shanahan said that the way Aiyuk moves is similar to Isaac Bruce, you can miss me with that. That makes no sense to me.
When Isaac Bruce was 23, he had 1,781
yards receiving. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of – he's also in the Hall of Fame.
Who was the quarterback on that team? On that team?
I don't know. It was 1995. So that's –
No. Click. Check. This is important.
Let me get it. Hold on. Let me get it. Chris Miller. Chris Miller. I've never heard of that guy. 1995.
Neither have I. First time I saw him was when I was looking up Isaac Bruce stats to talk about him when me and Jason Aponte talked about the all-time receiver list.
Yeah. Great receiver. Guy was really, really good. He was like Marvin Harrison, man. He was so good.
30, do you remember him at 38 on the 49ers?
Yes.
He was their best offensive player that year besides Frank Gore.
Yes, he was. So, dude, 12 games. Brandon Aiyuk, 12 games. And he's good. But, I mean, the idea – what I'm basically hearing from from the crowd that says don't let him return punts, they're saying he's too good. He's too good. And what I'm basically hearing is, so you're saying he's better than John Taylor. He's better than Deion Sanders. He's better than Antonio Brown. Like, what is too good? What are you talking about? Also, I'm hearing that it's too dangerous to return punts. I can't remember any serious injuries on punt returners. I'm sorry. I mean, it seems to me that everything you do in football is dangerous, but I don't think that returning a punt is more dangerous than running slants.
I think even if it's the scenario where anytime in a big moment you need him to return a punt, if that's how you're going to do it, then fine. Even that I'm comfortable with.
Because that's what the Cardinals did with Patrick Peterson, right?
Right. You can't. And the Deion Sanders did the same thing near the end of his career. But you can't have special teams always be the best case scenario is that your special teams plays dead even with the other team's special teams. You have to at some point get some sort of advantage. The Niners' kick return game is not an advantage. Their kicking game is conservative but solid. Their punting game is conservative but solid, and their punt return game is poor.
And there's that old adage that to win a football game, you need to win 2 of the 3 phases. And it's like the Niners don't try to win the special teams phase. So it puts them in a position where they have to win on offense and defense, which is hard.
And I think there are going to be games next year. I know people think that Brandon Aiyuk is going to walk in next year and have 10 catches, 145 yards, and 3 touchdowns every game. But there are going to be games next year where just because of the fact that the Niners are going to be a run-first team, the fact that George Kittle and Debo do exist, the fact that, Trey Lance is going to run the football and Mostert and others are going to run the football, and you're going to get a lot of carries in where Aiyuk maybe doesn't see a lot of targets just because that's how the game's going.
Thank you.
Well, in a game like that, if it's a close football game, a way to get him going in the game could be to have him return a punt and get a big play out of the punt return.
Keep in mind, this is a run-first team with a quarterback who may be 21 coming off a season where he averaged 19 passes a game. All right? They're not going to throw a lot. And a lot of the passes are going to go to Kittle and Debo. And Debo's going to get extra touches in the run game. How is Aiyuk going to get extra touches? How are you going to get Aiyuk more than 4 touches a game if he's not returning punts? Because he should have. Honestly, if he were on a team that passed more, he'd be getting 10. He'd be getting 10 targets a game. He's not going to get that on the 49ers, not this team. So I think you should be looking for more. People say, "Oh, you're going to use him too much." No, I'm worried about not using him enough.
Exactly. There we go. That should be the argument, right?
Yeah. They're not going to use him enough next year if he's not involved in the return game. He's going to end up with like 65 catches. I don't know. Because
the biggest difference between him and these other guys is that, Debo's the glorified running back is a big part of this run game. Aiyuk, I think one thing that we learned last year is that, Aiyuk and Debo, a lot of people compared them when they came out and all of that. And yeah, Aiyuk can still do the jet sweep end around stuff, but we saw very clearly in their usage when Debo was out and how Aiyuk was used, which was more similar to how Shanahan's used receivers like the Julio Jones, the Andre Johnsons in the past, lining them up as the X receiver and having them run routes outside the number, than what they did with Debo. It wasn't like because Debo was out, they just took all his end around, jet sweep, push pass plays and gave them to Aiyuk and ran it with like that. And we saw the times Aiyuk ran it, while he's smooth, he makes people miss. He's a strong runner. He's not anywhere close to Debo Samuel at running with the ball. So,
my point about Pettis is maybe the reasoning why Aiyuk won't return punts may be the same reason he didn't want Pettis returning. He may want to conserve his receivers for the offense. Well, yeah, but then Pettis fell out of the offense, right? Yeah, and I think Pettis was actually physically,
Yeah, and Pettis didn't want to take hits, and he had a trouble fair catching a punt one of the first times they had him do it, which is why they went back. Also, Grant, I wanted to answer that previous question.
Yeah.
Because I do have an answer for it. It's no.
Okay, no.
And here's why it's no. It's because if you look at data tells you it's no. Shanahan's never had a receiver over 10-plus touchdowns in his entire career.
Wow.
Andre Johnson's had the most at 9. The most Julio Jones had was 8.
Yeah, it seems like he likes to use guys as decoys. Like, I mean, he's going to get the ball to his number one targets, but when it's time to score points, he's like, okay, you're going to work hard to take away Julio Jones or George Kittle, so I'm going to Kendrick Bourne. So I'm going to Kyle Juszczyk. I'm going to someone secondary here.
Yeah, he's never had this is important. Kyle Shanahan has never had a wide receiver catch 10-plus touchdowns in a season with him calling plays.
That's
the most
wild.
Is Andre Johnson at 9.
I mean, it's just a crazy stat. Like, Bill Walsh doesn't have a stat like that. Andy Reid doesn't have a stat like that. Sean Payton. Usually these offensive gurus have some guys with crazy numbers. Like Devontae Adams put up 18 touchdowns last year. I mean, there were years like that for Jerry Rice, but Kyle is it must be a philosophy. So interesting.
I don't know what it is. I mean, but his red zone numbers, if you go through his 13 years as a coordinator, the average red zone efficiency for him and his offense is 19
Subpar.
in the NFL.
Subpar.
Do you mind if we answer Jesse Rodriguez's question right here?
Johnny Knox's back injury is why I don't want Aiyuk returning punts.
Well, then I don't want Aiyuk playing receiver either, and Debo being a glorified running back because of Brad Smith's injury. Yeah. And then I don't want Aiyuk playing receiver because of the millions of injuries we have had receivers get.
Yeah, like Niner fans are so concerned. They're so concerned about Aiyuk returning a punt, but Debo, go play running back. Running backs get hurt. Punt returners, I mean, it's like if there's anyone close to you, you just do the fair catch and no one can touch you. You can see everyone coming. There's no one going to hit you from behind. It really seems like actually just as dangerous as anything else in football.
Yeah, I mean, football is inherently dangerous. Like you can't have a player avoid a player getting hurt. If you're trying to avoid him getting hurt, there's a chance he's going to get hurt. Like you can get hurt doing anything in football. So I don't know why one person's injury now makes it impossible. Like Navarro Bowman's knee injury means I don't want Fred Warner tackling anybody near the goal line.
I can think of many more examples of wide receivers getting injured, catching a pass over the middle than I can think of off the top of my head of a punt returner getting blasted because he didn't call a fair catch or something.
I mean, I can think of Brandon Aiyuk getting injured 3 times playing just wide receiver last year.
Thank you.
The core muscle injury after he came into the draft, then he had the hamstring during training camp, and then he finished it off with the ankle injury.
For good measure. Okay, final topic. Enough of the punt return stuff. I made my point. We made our point.